The Olympic and official distances are always on a 250-meter track that's usually wooden and indoor. So that's kind of like the gold standard of the surface that we compete on. And that banking can be up to like 50 degrees. So it's very steep, it's really very fast, and you ride on bikes that don't have brakes. So it's like a fixed gear bike, and it's really fast and really fun.
There are no brakes?
Yeah.
Welcome to The Other 3 Years, a show for anyone who has an Olympic-sized dream they want to turn into a reality. Hi, and welcome to this week's episode of The Other 3 Years podcast. My name is Kristi Wagner, and this week I have guest Skyler Samuelson Espinoza. Skyler was a collegiate rower, but now she is a track cyclist, and most recently, she's been a tandem pilot with the USA paracycling team. So last summer, Skyler and her partner earned a bronze medal at the 2023 World Championships, and they are still hoping to earn a bid to the games this summer. So yeah, fingers crossed for that. But Skyler rode in college with one of my national team teammates, Charlotte, and Charlotte just keeps us all updated on Skyler and her awesome athletic career. So it was really fun to connect with her and learn more about like her experience in elite sport, kind of going from rowing to cycling and the ups and downs and what the experience has been like for her. So it was really a great conversation, and I know everyone will enjoy hearing from Skyler as much as I did. But before we get into that, here is an update on what's currently going on in my training. So we are still in Italy, but we are actually leaving for Switzerland to race at the second World Cup tomorrow. It's Tuesday right now. So today was a very exciting day because 4 more U.S. rowing boats qualified for the Olympics at the final Olympic qualification regatta, which was also in Switzerland. So that was so exciting. It was really, really fun. We all got to watch online, not in person, but just like so exciting for all of them. And it was really great racing, like across the board. Also, you know, like so tough. There were a couple boats that didn't qualify, and that's just like so hard. I mean, everyone's been on the wrong side of those kind of things. So, you know, I think it's really hard, but there's just like not much you can say. But yeah, really proud of everyone, like regardless of the outcome. I'm especially excited because my Orion teammate Lauren and my coach Kat were both with the women's quad, and they qualified, which means they'll both be coming to Paris, which is just like so exciting. And obviously everyone works really hard. I get to see how hard they work, so I'm really excited for them, and that it'll be fun to have some people from home at the Olympics and in the preparation and stuff. So that's just like very awesome, but really excited for everyone. It's a very exciting day becoming an Olympian, so I'm so happy that all of those people got to have that day today. But the rest of us get to race this coming weekend at the second World Cup in Lucerne, Switzerland. I'm really excited to race. It feels like it's been a long time since we've raced. So the times coming out of FOQR were a little bit slow. I think the water's just still a bit cold, so probably won't be setting any records or anything like that. But a lot of fast women's doubles are going to be there. So really exciting to see like where we stack up. Hopefully the team all has good races and, you know, kind of set us on the path for the rest of the summer. And then yeah, we fly home Monday right after the racing. So kind of a quick trip, but this week was good. A lot of rain in Italy, and then it got nice over the weekend. It was insane. Like there was so much rain that where the docks are at the rowing club here like flooded, so you have to wade through water to get to the docks, and just really crazy. But a really great camp. I think we had some like really good rows. We've all got these fancy new Philippies that have this eagle decal on the bow. It's quite the eagle. But, you know, the boats are really nice, and hopefully they'll make us really fast next week. Now it is time for my conversation with Skyler, and I hope you all enjoy it. Skyler, thank you so much. I'm super excited to chat.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Kristi. I'm really excited to be here.
I first of all feel like everyone should read your blog. I feel like you should just plug the blog and the YouTube videos because I feel like I got a lot of really good background information. You're also a very good writer.
Thank you.
Which I guess should probably, I feel like, very high education. So that probably shouldn't have been surprising. But I was like, this is so well written. So I feel like I know some things now about kind of your early path, but maybe just for the audience, like a little bit of bio, how you got to where you are today.
I'm from Maine originally, and I grew up, in a family of athletes for sure. My aunt has a gold medal in the Olympic marathon. My other aunt and uncle were like head track coaches. So definitely like a big running family, big athlete family. But I didn't really grow up like in sports. I feel like so many athletes like come on podcasts and they're like, I played soccer and softball and like all these other things. Like I feel like I was just like a normal kid. I just like ran around and like went to school and did my homework and stuff like that. I ran a little bit in middle school and high school. And then it wasn't until kind of the end of high school, I actually ran 2 marathons with my dad. I was like, oh, I kind of want to like try this. And it's something that we did to bond together. And then in college, I was training for another marathon and I was getting kind of lonely. I was like, look, I like working out, but like this is kind of boring and like taking a long time and by myself. So that's when I kind of found out that rowing is one of the only sports that you can walk onto like without any previous experience. And so I kind of tried it and then fell in love with it. So that's a little bit about my athlete origin story, I guess. But yeah, definitely surrounded by a lot of athletes and then kind of just found it because I was lonely and looking for a new adventure.
But when you were younger, you did a lot of different activities, right? And found like community and things like that, right?
Yeah, definitely. I went to a very small school. Growing up, my graduating high school class was 10 people. So I did a lot of like art. Yeah, it was small. It was like a lot of art, a lot of music, but I was like really involved definitely with my community because we were all like very close and tight. So for sure, I played the cello for a really long time. I did a lot of like other stuff. So for sure, I did activities, but definitely organized sport was not as big of a focus.
So then, yeah, joining the rowing team at Columbia, was that just like a shock to the system? What was it like, early days of that?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's probably good that I didn't know what it was going to be like because I think if you'd known, maybe you'd been like, oh, that's going to be like too hard. Let's not do that. But yeah, I think I got lucky in a weird way that like my first year, they had like a lot of injuries, and, like a lot of people leave the team that we had only enough healthy rowers to like make a squad at Ivy's. So I got to race at Ivy's like my novice year, which was like great for me. I think probably like everyone else is like, this is awful because she's really shitty at rowing. But it was like I got to race and everything was so hard, but it was such like an amazing community. And I also became really close friends with Charlotte, who's a mutual friend of ours. Obviously, he's on the senior national team now. But I just like made some really great friends and found the sense of community and also of like uplifting other people through sport that I feel like I hadn't really had a taste of before then.
So, what did you like about rowing? Like beyond the, having a team and a community in college and that kind of thing.
Another reason why I decided to start doing a sport was I was in my freshman year like Russian class. I'm a Russian like literature major, and my professor was like, "You are too competitive for this class. You need to bring that energy somewhere else, like not here." Because I actually walked out my sophomore year of college, and I think it was just like an amazing place to like let a fierce competitive side of myself really like grow. Yeah, like sometimes, we're always like, oh, like don't be too aggressive, don't be too like loud here in these other areas. And like rowing was just like an area where I was like, I just get to fucking like rage. Like, especially on the erg, like I just kind of like grew to really love that like edge and that just like really aggressive. I just get to give all of myself and be this like really intense personality in these moments. And I love that rowing really like kind of rewarded and allowed that intensity.
Yeah, 100%. Rage rowing. We love rage rowing.
Yeah.
How did you end up at Stanford and still rowing there?
So since I walked on my sophomore year at Columbia, I had an extra year of eligibility. And I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do after school yet, but I knew that I loved rowing and I wanted to continue being involved in sports. I'm also a very small open weight rower. I'm 5'2", and at the time was like 120 pounds. So I was like curious about lightweight. I know that Stanford had a really competitive program. So I was talking to the coaches there and they were like, yeah, we'd love to have you, but we can't recruit grad students. Like you need to get in on your own. So I was like, okay, no problem. Like I'll definitely do that. So yeah, I did. I did end up getting in for a master's at Stanford and got to row, with them. Unfortunately, I had to have back surgery that year, so I really only got to race the fall season. But then I ended up coaching at Stanford later. So like the program there is just amazing. And I loved getting to actually be able to row all year round rather than being on the ergs all year at Columbia. It ended up being a really great fit, even though I had to have that surgery. It just solidified for me that like I wanted to be in sports for a long time because I really loved it.
Yeah, so how did cycling come into the mix then? Had that been like underlying the whole time or?
No, so actually at the time that I had to get the back surgery, I felt like I wasn't ready to like put because I was hoping to like row at the next level at that point. I wasn't ready to like put down the idea of like being an athlete kind of at that next level. And then a couple things came into play. One is like I do have some like family connections at Nike, so I actually did a couple of like physiology tests with their like physiologist there who's like I was like, look, I want to do the next level, but like what should I try to do in terms of like optimization for my body type and my strengths. So I did that, and he was like, you should probably either do like cycling or like Nordic skiing, which is something I've also done, but it was like you're gonna have to move to Europe for that, so that's like a little complicated. And then also at the time I'd met the man who's now my husband, and he was a triathlete cyclist person, so we started to ride bikes together. And also cycling is way more accessible than rowing in terms of like being able to ride a bike and like train anywhere. And I wasn't sure where I was going to be after graduation. So it's kind of a combination of those things.
I just feel like it's so cool that you're like, oh, I'm just gonna do these sports, but like really, really well because I enjoy riding my bicycle, but like in no way am I competitive at it. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's fun.
Yeah.
Have a good time. I don't know. I just think that's really amazing.
Thank you. I mean, I am very competitive, as you know, as are you, as are all of us. And I think also that like something that's really cool about cycling and bike racing when you kind of like get a little bit into it is like it turns your brain on in this way that rowing doesn't always require. In rowing, sometimes like the less you can think, the better, right? Like just go as hard as you can from point A to point B. In cycling, it took me a little while to learn, like, okay, like racing smart and racing hard are not the same things, right? Like you need to like choose when to go hard and when to like hide behind someone's wheel and get a little more draft. So I found that really motivating and exciting to like get to be almost like you're like, okay, now I'm the coxswain and the rower. Like I get to make these game plans and these decisions. So like it is a cool, and obviously I know like, right, you're in the double, so it's just a little different, but like there's a lot more like game plan thinking when you're riding.
Well, I also think it's crazy like how much like you're saying like strategy, but also seems like pre-planned strategies a lot of the time. Like
Yeah. It's definitely different also between, I don't know what kind of bike riding you've watched, but like I mostly do track cycling. So road and track is like a little bit different also.
yeah, I was gonna ask you about track cycling. Like, how did that kind of start? And maybe just explain. Like, I think people sometimes don't even really know what track cycling is, or that you're like on a slanted surface, or
Yeah. I think I kind of knew that I wanted to be in track cycling from the start. The goal was kind of always like Olympic stuff. And definitely there's like a smaller pool. Like it's a little bit more niche. So there's a little bit more, like, there's a little more opportunities in that with track cycling. And also from my time in rowing, I was like, I'm like a fast, twitchy, slow athlete. And so like a fast, twitchy, slow twitch, I guess like a sprinty endurance person. And definitely track cycling is more, it's definitely a little bit more of a sprinty. Sometimes I tell people it's like the track and field to the marathon in terms of like distance and physiological demands. Of the Olympic and official distances are always on a 250-meter track that's usually wooden and indoor. So that's kind of like the gold standard of the surface that we compete on. And that banking can be up to like 50 degrees. So it's very steep. It's really very fast. And you ride on bikes that don't have brakes. So it's like a fixed gear bike, and it's really fast and really fun. And then, road cycling is obviously on the road with, brakes and kind of normal bikes. And definitely I still ride on the road a lot. I train on the road. And I race on the road even a little bit, but everything happens so much more quickly on the track. I mean, races that are like long races are like 5 to 10 minutes. And then there's some races, that are like a minute or less. And so everything just happens really quickly. The speeds are really high. And yeah, I think it's the most fun type of bike racing there is.
there are no brakes.
Yeah.
How do you control where you're going? You just like move up and down to control your speed? Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, it's all good. So it actually makes it safer when you're riding in a big pack of people because one person doesn't have the ability to like slam on the brakes and stop and like kind of cause a crash in that way. So when you're riding in a big group, basically you're just like moving up the track that actually slows you down because you're riding uphill, or down the track makes you go a little faster. And obviously you can like put pressure on the pedals. And then like it's like those bikes you ride as kids when you like back pedal hard, you can kind of like break it. But obviously it's not like when you're going really fast, you're not gonna stop. But slowly over time, if you kind of like put backward pressure, you can kind of slow yourself down.
This is an unimportant question, but something I've always wondered. Why? Like, is it just because of the incline that your coach kind of has to like hold you before you start and like give you a little push?
You hold because of the fixed gear. Like you want to be like ready to go right away. You usually those events where your coach is holding you are like timed events or time trials. You want to be able to just like push right away. Because the road races are longer, you can like put one foot in and put the other foot, and the race is like 3 hours. Doesn't really matter like the first couple of pedal strokes. But for these events where the coach is holding you, like every pedal stroke is counting. So yeah, it's because that start is so fast.
Yeah, I thought it was really funny when I first watched beach sprints for rowing because the coaches like hold the boats for the athletes. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh, finally. It's just like track cycling. Coach serves a
Yeah,
purpose.
kind of. It's gonna be bring them here for something. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. What do you like about sports now? Because I know, like, for me, college sports were kind of one thing. There was like a lot of team stuff.
Mm.
There was definitely a real community there, and there were like things I really liked. I've found that in elite rowing, like, there is definitely still community, but it's really different and it's like way more personal. So, what would you say are the things that like kind of keep you coming back and have like are your reasons to participate now?
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I've definitely found that. I think that people don't really realize leaving college sports, right? Like a lot of the resources that were available to you, both like tangible, like student athlete healthcare, and intangible, like your teammates, like go away and are really hard to recreate. I do think still that like track cycling is a very small community. And so like I'm sure this is the same when you go to international regattas now, but it's like I see a lot of the same people at every race. So that's like really fun to get to connect with people, from all over the world at these big competitions. I do also think that like training and pushing myself and finding like those limits is really exciting for me still. And I think also like I know we'll get to this, but like the para stuff has been really motivating to me in a cool way that like I really love supporting other athletes, especially women, kind of like in their journeys. And so getting to do that on like a very personal level has been really motivating to me. And yeah, I do think that like I feel like I have had more like a little more cynicism about sports as I've gotten older, but I do still believe that it's like a really cool place, like a low stakes place where we get to like do hard things and find out things about ourselves. So I still really enjoy doing that and connecting with other people who do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an opportunity to like go all in on something also, which I just don't think that
Yeah,
people like actually do in
agreed.
quote unquote real life. But yeah, great
Yeah.
segue into the para stuff. Like, how did that first come about?
So I always kind of had the 2024 games as an end goal so I started cycling at the end of 2018. And I was like, let me see how far I can get, by that games. Yeah, I mean, like I won a lot of bike races. I did a lot of stuff, and I was invited to a couple different camps that are kind of like, team selection camps and stuff. I mean, the US women's track program is very strong, and I was kind of like on the bubble for a lot of those conversations and connections, which is great. It's also a hard place to be. I mean, as all of us know, right? It's like hard to kind of be knocking on that door, but like not quite there. Then at the beginning of last year, the woman who was my coach also is coaching these women from the tandem with the women's para, and then their partnership split. And my coach said, "Hey, would you ever think about doing this? I think you could do both. Like, I think you could continue to try and like go for your own opportunities and the Olympic stuff, and also do the piloting thing." And I was like, I don't think that that's true. It seems like this is a big commitment, but I'm happy to like give it a try and give it a shot. And I think at that time, I was also feeling a little bit like not a little bit. I was feeling a lot of like, wow, this is really hard and I don't even know if I'm going to make it. And like, I'm putting so much of my own like money and everything into like trying to pursue this. And it's like, I'm getting close, but like, I don't know if it's going to happen. And I think I just felt like with the tandem, it is similar in a way, but it's also like a whole new skill set. I feel like for rowing people, it's definitely like rowing in a single and then like rowing in a double or like rowing in a pair or something like that. It's like, it's rowing, but it's like a different set of skills. And I think we don't get that many opportunities to do that at a very high level in sport. And also like the project of getting to form a relationship with someone, you know, in the blind community and like support her in her dreams, just like felt so values aligned and really like made me happier in sport. So I think that like the decision felt like a really big one at the time, that I was like, okay, I'm going to decide to do this and like make this my number one priority, and anything else that happens kind of happens. In retrospect, I think it was the right one for me. And it made me feel way more connected to sport and happier. And I've had some really, really cool experiences doing that.
From the get-go, you knew you'd be partnering with Hannah.
It's Hannah. Yeah.
Hannah, sorry. But had you guys ever like met before? Like, did you need to go through some sort of like tryout process to make sure that, you know, it was all going to work out?
Yeah, I did know that it was going to be Hannah at the time. Yeah, she's the only like track athlete, and she was the one looking for the pilot specifically. And I did do a tryout with her, and I went out. She lives at the Olympic and Paralympic Training Center in Colorado Springs, so I went out to meet her and do the test ride. In the U.S., it's not the same in all the countries, but in the U.S., it is the visually impaired athlete. She's also called the stoker, who gets to choose the pilot. So for sure, I did feel like a little bit of like a first date sort of situation where I was like, our personalities going to mesh. I talked to other people. I know her former pilot, so I talked to her. Yeah, it did feel a little bit like a first date meets job interview, but I think it was kind of clear from the beginning that we were going to be a good pair. So I feel very lucky about that.
That's really cool. I feel like I can relate a lot because I row in a 2-person boat.
Yeah.
And it is like just such an interesting sport relationship, like team dynamic. I am intrigued because I feel like a lot of people say it is like a marriage, and you are actually married. So would you say that a 2-person team is like a marriage, or would you say it's different? There's no right answer here. I'm like really just curious.
Yeah. No, I think I'm going to avoid answering your question for a minute and talk about the rowing again, because I think that like I obviously was a coach at Stanford, and we, you know, coached the double a lot. And then also I was around when Kate Burko was coaching Megan and Ellen out of the Stanford boathouse. And obviously like they have a very interesting and long like personal relationship and also like rowing relationship. And so I think I was bringing a lot of that experience into starting to work with the tandem, right? Where I was like, okay, like this could be a very intense relationship. I do think also it's a little bit different with the tandem, where it's like it does have the capacity to have very skewed power dynamics, where like the visually impaired athlete can say like, hey, this is my project and you are my motor, get on board, otherwise like I'm going to fire you. Or the pilot, it has happened, being like, I can see and I have a lot more biking experience, therefore you need to do what I want to say. So I think like I was aware of those things before. So it's like, hey, I really want to empower Hannah and make sure that she has a really good experience, and also knowing that this is a team like effort. But it's like it is a little different, I think, than like, you know, when you're both able-bodied like in that partnership. But I do think that like our relationship, like a marriage, is like something that you actively need to like cultivate. I think that a lot of people like ask me about piloting and they're like, oh, well, I could just like swoop in and like do this. And I'm like, oh no, like that's not how it works. Like it's not just like you just put two strong people together, or like you just put two people on the bike. There's a lot of off the bike stuff that needs to be managed. And I think like a marriage, you know, you need to actively work on that. But I think that my husband and I have less of a professional relationship. And I think that my husband and I are a little sillier than that most of the time. So, yeah.
Yeah. I think you made a really good point, though, of like it does take effort.
Mhm.
I'd say like one thing that I've really learned about 2-person boats that I think is true in relationships, whether it's like friendships or romantic relationships, is like anytime that I'm getting somewhat like frustrated or just like, I then have to remember that like the other person is also dealing with me. Like, which I think you kind of touched on there. Like,
Yeah.
it's not like a plug and play situation, which I do sometimes think that in like bigger rowing boats, their teamwork is definitely involved, but like you can kind of get lost in an 8, right? Like, and you just can't get lost
Mhm.
in on a tandem bike. You certainly cannot get lost, and like in a 2-person boat, you can't get lost. You have to have that trust, and it's not trust can't be fake. Like it has to be real. It has to be earned.
100%. And I think that like it puts more of a spotlight in you with like the emotions that you're bringing to the day or the workout or whatever. Like if you're off, your partner's probably going to know or realize, right? Like you're saying versus like in an 8 when it's like, okay, like whoever's in 3 seat today is a little grumpy. Like I'm just going to turn around and like talk to someone else. Definitely, I think it's a bigger emotional lift to be on and like be supporting your partner in the ways that you can all the time.
I watched your guys' race, and that was just like an insane race. Is that like a normal experience? And like, were you like feeling in control, or was like what was kind of going through your mind during that race? And I guess for context, they like at the very end sprinted into third place. Like it was wild.
That event was really special. Last year, World Championships, for the first time in kind of the modern era, was all cycling disciplines and para and able bodied. So it was like road cycling, mountain biking, BMX, like trick cycling, like artistic cycling. It was in Scotland and it was like this cycling mecca. All of the most famous cyclists of the world, like the people that we watch in the Tour de France and us, are like there in the same space. So that was incredible. And also the UK is like a big cycling area. So for sure, like that velodrome was packed. There was like thousands of people there. And that environment was like the most electric. Like I'm getting goosebumps like myself, just like, cause you know, like when you're rowing, you're like, okay, like, and with cycling, like you never have more than like a handful of fans, right? And so like to be in that environment where there's just like thousands of people, you're like, this is crazy. And I don't think that I'm ever gonna have that feeling again. Like we went to World Championships again this year and it was like, it's not the same. So yeah, so we ended up in that race, which is like match sprints where you're racing against another tandem, going against Italy in the bronze medal rides. And we lost the first one and then we won the second one. And then Italy kind of surprise attacked us in the last one. And then we ended up being able to like come around them and at the end. So maybe Hannah didn't know this as much at the time because she has been involved in sports for only a couple of years. But I was like, Hannah, that could have been as good as it gets for us forever, you know? Those are the kind of moments that you're like, we were able to pull it out in that moment. Like it was so close. That feeling was, yeah, so special. And I think being able to pull out something like that, it doesn't happen all the time. And you just got a little bit of extra magic juju.
It was very exciting. It's a very exciting race. But you guys are still racing together, right? Now?
Yeah, so we're hoping to go to Paris together, but kind of like all of our qualification stuff has finished. And we're just basically waiting for like the road athletes to, because the spots are shared across track cycling and road cycling for Paris. So we're kind of waiting for the road cycling to finish up and then see how many spots were allotted in general to see if we're actually officially going to make the team.
Ooh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's a little kind of just like hurry up and wait situation.
Is there like a timeline or is it just kind of like floating?
Yeah, there's a lot of different stuff with para, also with selection, but it should all get wrapped up at the earliest on July 7th, and the latest is July 10th. So it's like just a little over a month before we would leave.
Wow, that's very close. So right now you guys are just like training as if you to go, right? Like you kind of have to.
Yeah.
How often do you guys train together and how often do you train like in a velodrome?
We've been working together now for about a year and a half, and we've spent probably about half of that time together. I travel to Colorado Springs kind of in camps to train with Hannah. And then also we've spent time in LA, which is the only kind of like Olympic distance indoor wooden velodrome in the country. Yeah, like whenever we're together, we're on the velodrome. And then when we're apart, Hannah's training on a stationary bike, you know, obviously inside, and I'm mostly training on the road and also like my trainer inside. I don't go to the track that much when I'm apart from Hannah, but I do race. We have like local racing, so I go usually like once a week and race on the track. But yeah, usually just when we're together.
How many miles do you ride every week? This is not an important question. I'm just curious.
No, it is an important question. It's funny because people ask me that question a lot, and I'm like, not that many, because I'm technically like right now with Hana, we're like track sprint cyclists because our like target event is a 1 kilometer time trial and it takes like about a minute. So a lot of my efforts are very short and then I rest a lot. So, so I probably ride like, 30 miles a day or something like that, like at most. So not that many. A lot of people are like, "How many hours did you go?" And I was like, "I didn't go for it's not. It's more about like the intensity than the mileage. Most of our efforts are very short when we're together."
Oh, that's wild.
Yeah, yeah.
Just to switch topics a little bit, your blog, what was your like motivation behind starting it? Kind of how did that come to be? I don't know how long you've been doing it for.
I actually started my blog while I was an athlete at Stanford, so that was 2017. And at the time, I think I would just had like a lot of big feelings about sports. I think that was when I like really started to actually be like a women's sports fan. Like I was watching women's sports and also was like going through my surgery. So I was having some like identity, issues and just like having some big feels about sports. When I started writing in it a lot more recently, I thought about like restarting a new blog because you like look back at content you produced 7 years ago and you're like, oh, I don't know if I would like, write that again. But I decided just to keep it because I think it's like fun to look back on and see like the sort of stuff that I was writing about. And also like some articles that I wrote that were like about equal pay, and that's something that people are like, oh, equal pay, women's sports, like, a bunch of years later. And you're like, yeah, I know, it's been around. So, yeah, I think I just started it because I wanted to share thoughts about women's sports. And now it's kind of morphed into a place where I talk about, my own things, but also I talk to my friends and I put their stories up on my blog. And that is honestly one of my favorite things I do these days. It's a cool way for me to get to talk to my friends about sports and help share their stories.
Yeah, I feel like it's a really cool, like of what I read, which was honestly just like the most recent ones, but just like a really cool mix of different, like common themes, but it's not like so fenced into only interviews or only personal experience or only more like pop culture trends. Like, I feel like it really encapsulates a lot of stuff, which I think is cool because it's not like we're just in Caitlin Clark era, but it's not like we're not in Caitlin Clark era, like.
Yeah. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Yeah. And it's something cool that I like about the blog, which is like, it is mine. And like, I get to write about whatever it is that I want to write about. So I like for it to be like flexible like that. Yeah. And I think also it proves to me like a lot more people read the blog than I thought. And I think it's cool that like people still want to read stuff that's like a little more long form, like people. I think people nowadays like people only want to watch TikToks, and like that's not true. Like people do also want to read other people's stories or like listen to podcasts or stuff like that. So I enjoy that part of it.
Do you have like goals for how often you write, or is it just kind of like when you feel motivated or inspired or?
My ideal kind of like ebbs and flows with like travel and like sometimes people aren't available if I want to interview them or stuff like that. I try to put out something once a week ish, but some stretches of time are more consistent than others.
Are there any like kind of big things that you've learned from interviewing different people or in like researching for the blog?
Ooh, that's a great question. Something that I love to do that I feel like I wish other people did for me, that other athletes have that they really like, is like every time I write something about somebody, I send it to them first before I publish it. I think that's a huge pet peeve of sports reporting for me and like sports write ups is when like stuff is not accurate about people's sport. People will say like stuff that's like inaccurate about cycling or rowing. And I'm just like, that's not how you would say that. Or like, that's not that. So I always really try to respect like other people's like expertise by like sending it to them and saying like, hey, is this accurate? Have I portrayed you in a way that you feel comfortable with and in a way that's accurate? And I've heard feedback from people that like they really appreciate that. Sometimes different people are pickier than others, right? Like they're like, oh, I don't want to say this. And then like I regret. I'm like, okay, this is actually still like my piece. Like you don't get to say exactly what you want to say, but in the end, I'm really happy that I do that because I think it just like makes people, feel more heard. And then it's not like a surprise that I wrote something about them that they didn't like or wasn't true.
That's actually such a good point. I feel like there's a lot of reporting on rowing that is wrong a lot of the time. And I
Yeah.
feel like people get really frustrated about it. And I'm always like, Yeah, but at least they're writing about rowing.
Yeah, for sure. That's happened to me too. But then I just like don't understand and like, look, I could just not edit anything you're saying, but you could just ask me if like, she is like the current record holder of this thing. And I'm like, well, that's not true. Like, wouldn't you want to just like ask me before you write that? But I also agree that's like, it's cool you're writing about women's sports. And also like, if you're not in this sport yourself, you could like ask someone to take a look at it.
I guess what I'm saying is that, like, I think you're right, and we need to, like, hold people to a higher standard. It's not that much work, right? And there's, like, very
Right.
easy ways to check these things. It shouldn't be wrong in
Yeah.
2024. We have the internet, so
Yeah.
I just would love to know, like, what advice would you have for younger athletes? Like, maybe somebody who's like you, maybe like trying out a few different things, not finding like what exactly they want to be doing, or maybe struggling with injuries or different stuff. You've really stuck with it, which is awesome. Like, what would you say?
Yeah. I do think that like being flexible and taking the opportunities that come to you instead of like the opportunities that you thought you wanted has been really cool for me and definitely extended like my career in sports. I mean, the tandem's obviously a big one, but like even in Columbia when it was like say yes to stuff, like say yes to things, and kind of give it a try and see how it goes. Advice that I would give to like younger athletes is like there's always time to go all in, later. Like I think that there's a pressure, right, to like do that earlier. And I would say that those people tend to get burned out. Like obviously I did recruiting at Stanford, right? Like talking to people who are like, I'm so sure what I want to do with my life when I'm 15. I'm like, I don't think so. Maybe, but like being a little bit more open and like giving yourself time to explore before you feel like you go all in on something. And then just be gentle with yourself in transitions. I think that that's like a big part of what injury management is like, and thinking about retirement or thinking about changes and like high school to college and college to pro and things like that. Leveling up and going to a different area or a different level of what you're doing is always like really difficult. And I think that a lot of times, both as women and athletes, we want to be masters of everything right away, or we want to look like we're not struggling. So I think like grace in the transitions, being flexible, and then like taking opportunities that present themselves as they come.
That's excellent advice. Cool. Well, I don't know if there's anything that I didn't ask you about that you'd really like to share.
I don't think so. I love your idea of kind of like the other 3 years and the other parts of, being an athlete. I love too what you're doing to say that athletes are also people. I love hanging out with my dog. I love baking. I love these other things. Something I feel like has been a pet peeve of mine recently, where it's like so many people being like, oh, you must be on like a really strict diet right now. Or like people like make that comment. And I'm like, it's not malicious, but it's just like, I am pretty much a normal person, whereas like I eat normal food and like I watch movies or I like go for walks. Like there's this weird imagination idea that athletes like don't also have normal lives. So I like those parts of my life too.
Yeah, I totally agree. I get like very frustrated when people ask about my diet. I mean, I'm happy to talk to anyone about anything, but the idea of people sort of getting like food advice from me, I'm
Hmm.
like, I am a professional athlete. I exercise constantly and I'm in my 30s. Like, I've figured out that I need to consume this amount of food and these foods work for me. Like, I'm not saying eat this and look this way or eat this and achieve this. Like, it's so personal. I think everyone in the world should eat what makes them feel good. And if that's some sort of diet, that's great. If that includes, like, for me, pizza and cookies and, whatever, then like that should be great too. I don't know. Yeah, I feel like the diet culture, especially on like social media these days, just grinds my gears a little bit. So,
Yeah, definitely.
well, I don't know if you have any questions for me before we wrap it up.
Yeah, I loved your question for me about my blog. What are the things I've learned through having a blog? Do you feel like there's something you learned through hosting this podcast?
I think one thing I've learned from talking to just so many athletes is that like everyone has had sort of struggles, and like it has not been a linear or a direct or an easy path for anyone. Like even people that I've interviewed that have multiple Olympic gold medals, like there's still struggle and like motivations through hardship in those stories. And so I think that's just like been really nice and eye-opening for me. And one of the reasons that I think rowing was such a great addition to my life was because it, like you were saying with track cycling, like it's such a small sport. The gap from like high school rowing to the national team still seemed somewhat accessible. Like you'd see people, whether it was at the head of the Charles or whatever, like I don't mean that I hung out with Olympians when I was in high school. I mean, I could literally see them on the water, you know? I just think that if you see it, you can be it. Like to tie it back to the podcast, like getting to hear from people that have quote unquote made it that like they struggled too, or they struggle with self-confidence, you know, whatever it is, like maybe if a younger person or an older person, honestly, like we can all be motivated in different ways. If that like resonates and helps them like believe in themselves more, I just think that that's like really fulfilling and cool. And I think has been good for like me in having my own self-confidence.
I definitely relate to that in that like it's cool to talk to other people, not only to share their stories, but then you're like, oh, I get to take that for my toolbox. I definitely agree with that.
In that vein, when I was watching your video today and your husband was like, he said something along the lines of like, last year when you were in a valley. And I was like, that is the nicest way to say that ever. I'm going to like take that. And so you can pass on to him that I appreciate him being like the kindest person, even in like a sort of a, you know, maybe things weren't going well moment.
I feel like that would be like the mockumentary would be like, he's like, last year when she was in a valley, and that's me like sobbing on the floor. Yeah.
But that's a perfect example. I'm like, oh yes, that's a really nice thing. And the peaks always come. So. Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. It was really good to talk to you, and I'm excited.
So thanks for listening, and thank you so much to Skyler for coming on and speaking so candidly and sharing so much. It was a really fun conversation, and I hope everyone felt inspired and motivated by her, just like I did. So to close the show this week, I'm sharing a quote from this book I just finished called The Champion's Mind by Jim Afremow. Sorry, Jim. Anyways, this is a little bit of a lengthy quote. It's more like a story, but I'm just going to read it to you anyways because I really liked it. During a momentous battle, a Japanese general decided to attack even though his army was greatly outnumbered. He was confident they would win, but his men were filled with doubt. On the way to the battle, they stopped at a religious shrine. After praying with the men, the general took out a coin and said, I shall now toss this coin. If it is heads, we shall win. If it's tails, we shall lose. Destiny will now reveal itself. He threw the coin into the air and all watched it intently as it landed. It was heads. The soldiers were so overjoyed and filled with confidence that they vigorously attacked the enemy and were victorious. After the battle, a lieutenant remarked to the general, no one can change destiny. Quite right, the general replied as he showed the lieutenant the coin, which had a head on both sides. Hope you have a great week. See you next time. Thanks for listening. Bye. I'd love to hear from you, so send us a topic suggestion, or if you'd like to submit a question for our Ask Kristi Anything segment, head to our website, theother3years.com.